Hello, everybody. Welcome to Anderson Ranch and our summer faculty lecture series. I'm Lindsay Yeager, studio coordinator of painting, drawing, and printmaking. I'm excited to introduce our painting faculty, Sarah Awad, tonight. But before we begin, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. And I want to start by recognizing that the Anderson Ranch campus resides on the historic tribal lands of the Ute people, who called this area home for over 800 years. In honor of this legacy, we focus on building an inclusive community here, maintaining this as a place for inspiration and creativity in the center of the Rocky Mountains. John Hitchcock is sick and unfortunately can't be here tonight. So I want to open with a video that he sent to us that we'd like to show in his absence.
As a little kid, my mother, she would let me run up and down the hallway with crayons, and I would have crayons on both sides and just running, just drawing on the wall, and it was super exciting. I'm John Hitchcock, and I'm Kiowa Comanche descent on my mother's side, and on my father's side, I'm Northern European. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm a musician, I'm an artist, as well as an educator. Impact versus influence is about where I'm from in Oklahoma. I grew up on Comanche tribal lands next to Fort Sill and also the Wichita Mountains. So Highway 49 separates our land where I grew up from Fort Sill, the largest field artillery training base in the United States. And the Wichita Mountains is a wild reserve for deer, elk, buffalo, prairie dogs. So as a child, I would go and basically play in those mountains, and they're very important to the Kiowa, Comanche, Apache, and other tribes that are in that location. So Fort Sill was an army post that was set up as pretty much a place where indigenous leaders were pushed or ended up there or imprisoned there. And so Fort Sill housed Geronimo of the Apache people, St. Dide of the Kiowa people, and Quanah Parker of the Comanche people. As a kid, when I got into making art, I was, 6, 7, 8. So my kaku, my Comanche grandmother, she'd say, okay, I want you to draw some designs. And so these designs I was drawing were influenced by the beadwork she was making. And after you draw that, I want you to go outside and I want you to draw the roses. And then she would take that drawing, set it down, and she'd say, okay, I want you to make something up. You design your design based on what you've learned from going outside and also drawing these. So she was teaching me how to use my imagination, how to think about and kind of bring my imagination together to the things I observed. The installation, it is very much influenced by the symbolism of Kiowa, Comanche beadwork and looking at the designs and patterns. There's an hourglass that you see that references time from the past, present, to the future, and then how we think about time, and how are we dealing with time, and what are we doing about time. You've got these animal heads that are almost like spirits. They're ghostly, they're drawn with all this cross-hatching, and they have these voids in their eyes, and they look as if they have passed on. And so it's, to me, a reference to the spiritual need, the spiritual belief systems that I grew up with. So these are complex questions that I think about in the work and that I'm always looking at ways to present it so that a viewer would be able to look at that and do the research and start to think about what's the relationship of this tank or this helicopter to this bird that's flying through these butterfly. The military and its relationship with war and violence is complex for Native people because of the fact that many Plains tribes come from warrior societies. Indigenous people have the highest amount of service in the military, larger than any other demographic. One of the unique things you think about within military and its relationship to Indigenous culture is some of the military vehicles and helicopters and tanks and such are named after Indigenous tribes. The installation, there's the Apache helicopter. There's also a Comanche helicopter that's not in this installation, but there's also a Kiowa helicopter as well. It's all about survival. And so why Indigenous people serve is for survival, and survival of the people, and survival of the land. And as a youth, for me, hearing helicopters flying over, hearing bombs outside, the war is outside my window. It's right across the street. So in my little protective room, I'm using my crayons and I'm putting paper on the wall and I'm creating war scenes. And that's the beginning of this notion of breaking space and having this ability to place things on a wall. And this is just a giant drawing to me, going up into the ceiling, going around on the walls and bringing attention to various aspects of places you're normally not looking. What I would want someone to take away from this artwork, impact versus influence, is complexity. And the complexity of the environment we live in, and the chaos of all of the information that we're constantly being bombarded with, and the idea of the hopeful small moments that you may find in that chaos.
So now I'd like to introduce Sarah Awad. Sarah Awad has had solo exhibitions at Night Gallery in Los Angeles and the Third Line in Dubai, and her work is in the permanent collection of the Dallas Museum of Art. Sarah teaches at the Claire Trevor School of the Arts at University of California, Irvine, and is based in Los Angeles. Please join me in welcoming Sarah.
Just gonna pull it up. Okay, we're good. So in putting these images together for tonight, I kind of did something different than what I normally do. I decided to not show you work chronologically, but to kind of show you different bodies of work and and kind of walk you through some ideas that are kind of finding trajectories within them. But I'm going to start with an older piece. This is from 2010, so a long time ago. It's sometimes embarrassing to show work that's super old. It also doesn't look like anything I'm making now, but I show it because I think that the kind of like life of a painter and the kind of like continuous kind of making leads you down lots of different paths, and sometimes you make something at one point in your life that you, at the time that you're making it, it's kind of an oddball work and it's really unusual, and you don't really know what it is, and then like there's some kind of like nucleus in it that you know is really important, and so you kind of hold on to it and like set it aside and keep like returning to kind of looking at that and sort of understanding that. And I feel like this is one of those works for me. I don't think it's a great painting, but I was really young when I made it. But I think the thing that really interested me about it was that at the time that I was making this, most of my work was based on photography as like a source material, and I was taking canvases and like reworking them and building new layers on top of old layers, and that kind of process has influenced my current work, and I think this work as well. There's something happening with the way that representation and the materialness of the paint is working together and kind of like simultaneously bringing forward the painting. And that wasn't happening in any of my other work. And I felt like that, I was like, I want my work to do this more. So even though none of my work looks like this, there's something in this that I found to be really important. I'm gonna jump forward to 2014, and I was working down a couple of different trajectories, thinking about how to kind of work in a figurative vein, but with my kind of interest in abstraction, in particular how color could be organized on a picture plane and how that might be able to create and contain space and how bodies could live in that space. So this is kind of an important piece from that time. So this is about 10 years ago. But at the same time, I made works like this that were also had figurative elements in there, but really kind of non-literal or non-representational, kind of investigating abstraction as well. So these were made in the same year, totally different kind of avenues, I think. And part of the reason I was making work like this is I really had big questions about what is my subject? Like what was going to be the subject of my work, and how do I find a way forward in both the language that I'm working in, but also how it connects to what people are really seeing. At the time, I had this image of this Beckman painting on my studio wall, and was completely obsessed with Beckman and his sort of approach to composition. And I just kept kind of returning to this particular piece, and decided, I'm just gonna like spend some time remaking this work. I'm gonna like investigate what it is that I'm so interested in about it. And I ended up, I remade it like 6 times, and most of them are not very good, but this was kind of the final version of that, and it became the kind of the center or the nucleus for a body of work in a show. And I called this painting This, That, and the Other. The thing that I really gravitated towards with the Beckman painting was that he used a lot of mirrors to duplicate the body in the painting. Like it was a way of like replicating and adding another figurative moment into the painting where the body would be multiplied. And it also was at the same time a window. So it was like this framing device and this replication device, and it added kind of a third element into the painting. If there were 2 figures, and that was kind of like the third figure. So I was really interested in that, and I made a whole show kind of centered around that idea. So this is the color looks more like this than the other slide, but this is its installation. I'm going to show actually a lot of slides from installation so you can get a sense of the scale as well and how it kind of sits in the space. But this is other installation shots from the show. And each of the pieces, I think, kind of deals with that idea of like the replication of the body and multiplication. The title of the whole exhibition was called Double Field. And this is the piece that title came from. And Double Field kind of both talking about that idea of multiplication, but also this particular painting is made from like doubling a composition literally and then like shifting it. So I had like a sketch in a sketchbook composition and was kind of like working from that, and I just kind of like repeated it and shifted it and kind of made this kind of longer panel. So the bodies kind of get literally multiplied in the field, not reflected at all, but doubled. And you can kind of see that, but I think the abstraction and the color really takes over, so it's a little bit less literal than I'm describing it. And I'll just kind of scroll through some other images from the installation. This was shown in Night Gallery in 2018 in their original, well, not their first space, but their original space that they have kind of now on their campus off of Santa Fe. But the space is really unique in that, oops, I'm gonna go back, that it's like a square within a square that's like tilted. So I can't really describe, but the wall, you can actually see the walls are at angles, which is a really kind of odd and unique thing for a gallery. And at first I thought, oh, this is gonna be terrible to show paintings in, but it was actually the best space for painting because wherever you stood in the gallery, you were able to see multiple works at once that were not necessarily in the same room, and it really gave you like this interesting visual experience of, especially of color, of being able to interact with the paintings more than just one at a time. So I'm just gonna scroll. I have lots of images to show you from different bodies of work, so I'm gonna just scroll through some of them. This is called American Eclipse. The idea of like framing and repetition happens in all of the paintings. I think actually the one thing that's kind of carried forward in the work is repetition of form. I think of it like poetry, the way that a poet might use words in repetition or themes in repetition to kind of like bring a kind of circle you around an idea and bring you in. Some other installation shots. Again, it kind of also, again, it helps give a sense of the scale of the work. That's that painting. These ones were quite large. And actually, many of them were sort of loosely inspired by figures that I was kind of pulling from art history. Gestures that I was seeing, relationships that I was seeing, and then I would kind of like add my own kind of take on it or add something else into it. Often there in the work, especially now, there's always like a kind of third hidden body or another kind of figure located in the background of this space, kind of looking out at the viewer, contemplating what's happening. I don't quite talk about the paintings that narratively because I'm actually really interested in abstraction, and I think the subject of my work truly is not figurative. That's kind of something I've come to realize over time. The figuration kind of grounds the work, but I'm actually much more interested in building space through color. And so this is Helen Frankenthaler, one of my big heroes. I actually saw this piece in person somewhere in this time period and just thought, wow, like this is mind-blowing. The things that she was doing that in this body of work in particular, I felt like were so contemporary and really hit on some of my interests. In particular, the way the frame is working. And I actually saw this after I did the body of work I'm going to show you next, but I think they're really interconnected. And I was finding a lot of resonance with the way in which she kind of repeated the structure of the canvas. Like you can kind of see the structure that's happening behind the grid of the stretcher bars repeated in the front of the canvas and painted and carved out those marks. So I'm going to take you back. So the previous body of work was 2018. This is from 2015. I actually was not painting with the figure at all, and had sort of, I don't really know why, but had decided that I was going to paint a bunch of gates. And I was kind of interested in the gate as a way of, as sort of a subject that could interfere with the picture plane. Like it would reside on the space of the picture plane and interfere with the ability of the viewer to look past it. And so you would have to look through it to get into the space of the painting, forcing you to kind of like actually engage with the act of looking. And it was kind of more of an abstract device. This is called Studio Door. It's literally the exact same size to the half inch of my industrial studio door at the time in Culver City, or near Culver City, which is also the ubiquitous Home Depot door from China, I'm sure, and that kind of like industrial pattern, and was thinking a lot about the history of painting on doors, painting doors in general, Robert Rauschenberg's doors, Picasso painting on doors, and kind of engaging with that history. I did a show of these paintings. I probably made 30 gate paintings. That's what they were called, gate paintings, nothing complex. But I was also engaging with other people who use that subject, like Matisse, and that kind of carving out. So when I saw that Helen Frankenthaler painting and the way that she was thinking about that geometry, it made me really excited. It offers an opportunity for like a push-pull with space that I'm really excited by. This is a shot of my studio from that time, so I don't have any installation shots of that show in this slide lecture, but this is from my studio at the time, so you can kind of see how I work. Craziness of the space, the size of the paintings, what I was doing and thinking about. One of the paintings in the show, very randomly, was inspired by some architecture I had seen in San Francisco on a trip, and I kind of wanted to play with the idea that the gate was the thing, and there was like pieces of the architecture of the building that were removed, and then you would kind of have this L-shaped canvas, so it's 2 panels. Actually, the reason I'm showing it is because it's not the only time I've made an L-shaped panel. I did it actually in a show a couple years ago, and I'm going to show images of that in a minute, but wanted to bring this up just to kind of reference that second piece that happened years later. So yeah, I just like the idea of the painting occurring on 2 panels, but having it not be a rectangle and having that, specifically that form, deal with the architecture that I was referencing. And it could kind of act as a device to kind of break up or reframe the picture plane. After I finished that body of work in that show, I actually continued to make these paintings, but they just got really big, like a lot bigger. And so I'm showing this image because it gives you a sense of the scale of those pieces. And they became much more about the space and less about the architecture of the gate. And the gate was just kind of like an avenue for me to impose a figure on a ground and like play with figure-ground relationships and color and kind of building and constructing that space. This is one of the really large ones. I'll take a moment with this one, I think, to talk about the material that I'm using and like how they're made. Like sometimes I get a lot of questions. They're actually both water-based material and oil-based material, and I actually begin the paintings on the floor, on the ground. They could be on a tabletop, they're just too big to be on a tabletop, and I work in the round on them. Sometimes if, like this one is so big that I can't reach the middle, so I've got like sticks with paintbrushes tied to the end of them and kind of trying to reach the middle of the painting. This one in particular, I wanted to wipe something out that was in the middle, and I had no way of reaching it, so I just tied a rag to a stick and was like poking at the middle of the canvas. I eventually made myself a rolling bench that I could walk out over the canvas on top of so that I could bend over the middle. And the reason they're made flat is because I use a lot of liquid watercolors and that's something that's kind of used effectively like gouache. And so the material is very watery and water-based, and I don't want them to drip. I want them to kind of evaporate and dry in the way that I've laid them down, so I work on them flat. And then I kind of bring the painting upright and start to work on them with oil paint. At that stage, I may actually return them back flat and work in oil paint in a watery way that also requires not being on the wall. But there's an interplay. Sorry, I'll stay on this one. There's an interplay between the language of the oil paint and the language of the water-based materials. The water-based materials, like Helen Frankenthaler, I think, and the way that she was using either in her earlier days her really, really loose oil, chirpy oils, or in her later days acrylic, the way it has a sense of improvisation with them just by the natural the accidental nature of the material. There's a lot that you can't control when the water is drying, and so it kind of just does its thing, and then you have to react and respond to it. And I really am interested in the trajectory of abstraction, and there's a few abstract expressionists that worked in this vein, that where there's the accident and then there's the intention and how they interact and how you work with them in your studio, responding to something that you don't necessarily know what it's going to be, and then bringing kind of decision-making and intentional acts into that space. So the way that I work is very responsive. It's very much about investigating the thing that the actual painting, and I don't always know what the end result's going to be. I might have a loose framework compositionally, but that's about it. This piece is from 2013, so I'm jumping back. And I think it's interesting to think of, this one is 2017, and then 4 years before that, this piece is I think it's 15 by 18 or 14 by 18, something like that. It's a really small painting. And I showed it in a large exhibition of at that time where the work also looked nothing like this. Well, I kind of was looking through old images and thinking, whoa, I actually was making architectural paintings years earlier before those gate paintings. This painting is based on an image from a still of the pilot of Twin Peaks, where Renette Pulaski walks across the bridge. And the time that I was making the body of work, for some reason, I was working really late nights, and I would get home at midnight, and then I would just fall asleep to Twin Peaks. And so it was the theme of the body of work, and my unconscious was that show. And I finished the body of work, and then was I just need to paint a still from this, and this was the one that I kind of picked. But you can see the way that I'm using color, totally divorced from the source, and really interested in how color can layer and be kind of its own internal world, and really more about the painted space. Okay, jumping forward to, this is 2021, so definitely during the pandemic. I think we were in the probably post second lockdown in LA or something like that when this opened. Night Gallery had opened up another campus space right next door. They kind of expanded, and I did a small show in what I like to think of as their chapel. It's really small. The show was called Tender Observer, again, based on one of the paintings I'll show you later. But I was thinking a lot at that time about, the paintings got way more labored and way more dense and way more fragmented. Had been 3 years in making work, and they had just evolved. And in particular, at that time, I was thinking a lot about relationships, isolation. I mean, of course, we all were, isolation, how we related to one another, and the idea of just understanding one's own identity in relationship to other people, but especially how one does that when society and community is totally shifted. So I'm going to just scroll through some of those images from that installation. It's very small. There was 5 pieces that were hung within that room, and then some other pieces in the body of work. Actually, the color's not that terrible on that slide. This is the hardest thing to photograph. The painting really doesn't look quite like this. I was using a lot of kind of neon reds in this painting and playing them off of grays. And that's just one of those things that can't be captured digitally. It just doesn't, it's just totally lost on that spectrum. We came pretty close, but you can see how it looks next to the other things in the show. This one's called Pink California. I can't remember what this one's called. But this one was actually, I was talking to my class this week about this. This is my favorite painting from this body of work, and I got to kind of keep it as a not-for-sale painting from my own personal estate. And I love this painting. It was, the color was largely inspired by being in my mother's rose garden and seeing these white roses against this kind of black backdrop with these greens. It's just the color was totally located in a particular moment in memory for me. And I kind of there's some interesting things happening in this, a figure holding a cell phone and someone doing someone else's hair. There's a more narrative moments that normally occur in my work. And I just really, really like the scale shift in the work on that, with kind of a shift in scale between the figures within the space. At that time, when I did that show, they were just remodeling which is now their new kind of large space. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And this was 2021, and this year, 2024, I did an exhibition in this space after it was finished. But I just thought it was really cool to show you it open before anyone had shown in it. That was kind of in what is now their office. And this is the piece that I named that body of work after. It's called Tender Observer. You can actually really see in this how I'm playing with kind of the watery layers that are happening. I don't like to talk about them as an underpainting because I don't think of them as an underpainting. They're just like the initial stages of the painting, and then reacting and responding to them and letting them kind of the freshness of that mark making kind of show through. This painting has a lot of transparency in it and built up layers. And then in a couple years ago, I think it was 2022, I did an installation project, which I've never done before, but I had an opportunity just through the connecting with someone who owned this space in Chinatown, and he was interested in doing art projects with artists, and I sort of proposed this to him. I was just like, I kind of want to do a site-specific painting. It'll be a show, but it's going to be one painting. It'll be epic. And he was like, okay, cool. Now, just to explain the image of this, the wooden trunks on the side are his, that he like sourced from some, I don't know where he got them. He just like cut down trees and like sourced them, and he had this goal of creating this space as like a meditation space, so he's gonna put these trees in this space. But when I showed up with the project, like those were in the space, and I was expecting like an empty room, so that actually has nothing to do with installation. And I was sort of like, I mean, the whole thing required like, it's a site-specific project. Why are there trees in the middle? Actually getting the painting in the space was really challenging because you had to navigate them around the tree trunks. But anyways, the idea was that I would make a painting in which it's one of these open storefronts in Chinatown that actually has a loft in the back, and there's a wall kind of covering that loft. The upstairs balcony, the wall doesn't go all the way to the ceiling. It stops as like a balcony that you can kind of look over, and it was L-shaped. And I was like, I'm gonna use that and make a painting that is the exact same size and goes floor to ceiling, and almost like a chapel, like a Renaissance chapel, like becomes this portal at the back of the space for you to kind of enter into. I kind of love the idea that in the Renaissance, it's an interesting moment. Like we don't think about painting having that history anymore because we're just so like, painting has moved kind of in a different direction, but the paintings on the walls, they were both like planes and also like these like open portals to this other world. And I just kind of like the idea of trying to kind of translate that. And then also it's like a bizarre thing to try to paint. I do have a closer image. Like this panel on the right, that narrow one, is like 3 feet wide by 10 feet tall or something, or more than 10. It's very challenging to try to kind of think about how that would work. I like to think of the doorway as like a cutout that kind of like, as if the bodies were kind of walking through the space invisibly and like entering the canvas from off screen or off stage, so to speak. I also had no idea what the upper canvas would look like in the space where you're kind of like looking up at it as opposed to looking across at it, because it truly is like above you when you're in the space. Like that, sort of like that. And I'd also never worked this big. The upper panel is over 12 feet long and like 8 feet tall or something like that. And again, like I had explained before, I work flat on the ground, and trying to kind of reach the middle was super challenging. Trying to not have the painting sag when I was working on it was really, all of it was just a completely different realm of what I consider, like physically had to consider in terms of the athleticism and of the process that I was bringing to the painting. I actually really enjoyed the challenge. I think I learned a lot from the challenge, and I think challenging oneself in those ways kind of can produce something really interesting. So that's that side panel. What is it called? Midnight Canopy is the name of the show and the name of the piece. That same year that I did that, I also did made a body of work that went to Dubai, to the third line. And I had never been there before, didn't see the space in advance, so it was really just making a body of work for a show. All the work in the show, at the time I was looking at a bunch of NASA photography on Instagram of these like planets explosions, all the like really just kind of crazy colors, and some of that color made its way into my work. And so the titles of the work sometimes reference the phenomenological experiences of that. Generally, when I begin a painting, I kind of have a color intention. It's where the painting, that's like the genesis for the painting is an idea about color relationships that I want to play with. And so that's like the first thing I do is to kind of mix up that palette. And often that kind of palette stays pretty consistent from start to finish, but not always. And this painting is an example of a painting that just really shifted. I had an idea that this painting was gonna have a ton of cadmium yellow medium in it, like kind of like a mango color. I was like, I'm gonna do a mango painting that has like olive green to butt up against, and I don't know what else is gonna be it. Maybe it'll be violet. And so I started working with these colors, and it was like so bad, like so garish. And it just kind of forced me to keep adding, like editing and adding color and shifting. And this is kind of what came out of it. And I'm actually like really interested in how that played out. You can't see any of the yellow that was in the original painting, in the final painting, but in person, there's so much layering happening with the transparent paint and the scumbling and kind of all the kind of moves that are happening with the material. You do kind of see it as still kind of underneath all of that. This painting is called Rainbow Clearance. I called the body of work Rainbow Clearance and Other Paintings. I think at the time I was like, I'm gonna make a rainbow sprinkled painting. And then I do have a lot of really vibrant colors that kind of act like neons. None of these are neon paints, but they're just really, really vibrant, especially when they're used in its like kind of most liquid and transparent form. So that was kind of the beginning of this painting, and I thought I'm gonna just try to add white everywhere and see what that does if I knock back all the color with white. It doesn't, I think it reads better in person than it does on the slide, as does a lot of my work, but I'll show you other images. I think I have an installation shot of that one as well. And then this one was shown next to this painting called Night Vision. I'm talking about like the genesis of the color just because I think I'm a scavenger for color. Like that's how I experience the world, and I kind of make mental notes of that. So this is kind of thinking about the night landscape in an urban space, Los Angeles for me, and the lights of the city, and kind of how those get captured in the darkness. And I really wanted to kind of duplicate that feeling in a painting. So that meant, again, like laying a lot of saturated color down first and kind of editing out with black, almost the opposite of this, which was white over color, and this was kind of black over color. I had never done that before in my work. And then I kind of hung those paintings next to one another. Oh, I guess I don't have an install shot of that. Thought I did. This is called Limbo. Oops. How am I doing on time? Okay. Gonna move quickly through the images. So all of this was part of that body of work. This was a smaller piece. I don't work that small. I find working small really, really challenging because I work really gesturally with big marks, and so kind of trying to force that mark and force that's the scale of the figure into the smaller canvases can be really hard. But everyone's get asked to make small work a lot, so I would love to just spend a whole year investing in figuring out how to do that. And I can't remember the name of this painting. I wish I could. Okay, I think a lot about de Kooning. I wanted to include a slide here. This is Door to a, of course I know his title. This is Door to a River. This this painting also like very influential for me. I've seen this painting in person a handful of times, and I think it's in the collection of the Whitney. Is that right? Does anyone know? Has anyone seen this? Okay. I think that it's part of his pastoral series from the early 60s, and I think that well, for one, I just think the way he uses paint is like truly magical. But there's something about the way that he's kind of created this portal within the piece that while it's a kind of a non-objective expressionist abstraction, you still have this kind of like figurative moment in it that opens up space in the painting. And there's like very few colors in the painting too, but you really have this amazing sense of the way that yellow kind of carves around this cave and brings you into this space. So I love this painting. And I think about him, he's like I think that there's like an avenue for the future through him for me. And so I always kind of include a piece of his in my lectures to remind me of questions that I have about painting. Okay, this is a body of work that I just showed this year at Night Gallery. And remember that vaulted ceiling, beautiful vaulted ceiling warehouse space. They converted that into a gallery, and this is the space. So I just did a show there. It was called To Hold a Thing. And I'll show you installation images from that, as well as a few To Hold a Thing. Yeah, and I'll talk about the title in a minute when I pull up one of the paintings. Kind of run through them a little bit faster. So this piece is called To Hold a Thing That Cannot Be Held. It comes from a poem. It's like the last line of a poem about a bear who died in a fire, and she kind of concludes a sonnet. Wait, a sonnet is a song to hold a thing that cannot be held, or something like that, like this last line of the poem. I just love that phrasing and that idea, because I think that painting is like that. Like painting is like the attempt, the kind of almost futile attempt to hold something that can't be held. And I feel like that's kind of my relationship to painting. You're constantly trying to pursue these questions in line of inquiry and find something that like you think that you're on the verge of discovery, and then it's elusive and it gets lost to you, and you keep coming back to it, and it's kind of this kind of lifelong pursuit. Simultaneously, this painting's about motherhood, and I think motherhood is like trying to hold something that can't be held. These are other paintings in this show, just to show you some quick installation shots. This piece is called Girl Genius Machine. The cell phone makes another appearance in the paintings. I was thinking kind of about how, like, there is this element in the work where the figures seem and can be really posed, and so I just kind of wanted to make a painting where I just brought that right to the surface, like acknowledge, like here's a body posing, and that made me think of selfies and the act of taking pictures and kind of bringing it more into kind of a contemporary narrative. Ironically, the thing that I got talked about most with people was Picasso. I wasn't thinking about Picasso with this painting, but everyone was like, "Oh, Demoiselle d'Avignon." It's like, no, that's not. But I think with the minute you have a figure that's raising their arm, I don't think you can kind of avoid that, just like as a caricature. But I think actually the parts of the painting that I'm super interested in are the way the color's moving and layering and doing these weird things that obscure. Another thing that I find myself doing often, and this comes from looking at other paintings that I love, which bodies kind of overlap or collide, and using color to kind of interlock them, like the way that green is working in this painting and kind of interlocking the two figures that are standing next to one another. Letting those abstractions that are coming from the painterly decisions kind of dictate where the figures are and how they're occurring, and be maybe possibly more important than the figuration. And that same palette I used to generate another painting, but then decided that that painting was going to get obscured with black. That's this piece. I had thought about this as a painting in which it was just as, like, I don't want to say literal, but I've had felt for a long time that, like, the composition and, like, compositional devices in the painting were really obvious. And then when I put it in the show, I realized actually it's quite abstract. Like, it feels very invisible to people. I love this shot because you can see the painting in between the two. I just like, I didn't know where the paintings were going to be hung when I made them, but the painting itself has a very grid-like feel. I don't have a large image of this one for the sake of time, but I loved the way that the beams, the wooden beams, kind of framed this painting within the space and emphasized that grid. And these are the last two paintings I'll show from that show, and to conclude the talk. This painting on the right, Folding Sky, one of the larger pieces in the show, trying to kind of like reduplicate that idea of like a longer panel, a mural, kind of thinking about how the bodies can kind of move through space in a different way at that scale with something that has like more of a potential for a story arc, I guess. This painting was really challenging. This is another painting that I feel like was really bad for a really long time. Had the same problems with color that I had with that other painting, where I had an idea and it just did not work, and I was like beating my head against the wall, trying to work, and I almost scrapped it. And then I had a studio visit, and someone said, you know, you should just finish it, like just keep going, because I was going to throw it away, and I didn't have time to throw it away, and I knew the show needed a big piece. And I'm really glad that I kept working on it, because I feel like it was kind of one of the better pieces in the show. Oh, for those people who are in my group, remember how I was talking about doing that thing that was like really messy and gross and like was just ended up, that's in this corner, in the lower right-hand corner. I did a demo today and was explaining something very specific, so that's happening in that painting. And this is the last piece. Don't remember the name of it either. But I'll show. But I want to open up to questions, because I think I took a long time, and thank you. We can leave it up, I guess. If you
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Sarah. You're awesome. Well, raise your hand if you have a question, and I will bring the mic to you.
This is a question from a very non-painter person. Could you go back one image? Okay, I'm fascinated with the layering in here. Could you show me, like, do you remember, like, what's the last thing you painted on here?
Last thing I painted?
Yeah, like what? Because I'm trying with my eye to follow. Like, well, she had to do this color before she did this color, but wait, she had to do this one, and so I'm just curious. Like,
I know, and I think that they're a lot hard to see on the screen. Like, the screen really flattens it out, so it's really hard to see. I think when you're in front of a painting in real life, and this is true for all painting, you have a better ability to deconstruct what the artist was doing physically. Uh-huh. I don't actually remember what the last thing I did was, but I will say that I tend to work on the painting all at once, so that I'm kind of building it up, so I'm never just focused on one area. So I may have done something over here, and over here, and over here, as like kind of like the last final moves. Actually, I do think that the part of the painting that wasn't working for a really long time was kind of the space around these two figures. So I was kind of trying to work up these passages. It was probably one of the last things. There's a figure up here. I don't know if you can see it. It's sort of cropped. It's kind of going like this. Is anyone nodding? I can't tell. They're kind of cupping their face. You can see a mouth and a nose and a hand. And like sometimes like one of my, I don't want to call it a strategy, but I'm really interested in like painting the thing by not painting the thing. there was a season where I found myself like getting better at painting, and so I could move faster, and then I would arrive at like the end result like quite a bit more quickly than I used to, and realized that that actually was like a worse way of making a painting, and that complicating the process of making the painting generated something better. And so trying to elongate that time that it took to arrive there was important. And that meant maybe painting around the thing rather than painting the thing itself. It also relates to this idea that I love, this quote by Richard Pousset-Dart. And he said, I don't know if I pronounced his name correctly, he's an abstractionist, who said, to paint a flower is to paint a lie. To paint a painting is to paint a flower. So like the idea that like truth in painting, or the kind of approximation of that, is to kind of maybe not paint the thing, that maybe the nameability of the thing actually can work against you. So all that to say, the last thing probably was working up the space around the figures in this area and not trying to have it disappear, but trying to think about the figures located in that space.
So when you're done, do you know you're done?
No, I think there's actually a lot of time spent looking in the making of the painting and afterwards. When a painting is finished, I think is just one of those big looming questions for every painter. And they say like you need another, like the painting, I've heard this said, that it takes two people to make a painting, one person to make it, the other person to chop their arm off when it's done. I've actually found that as a teacher, my role is always to tell someone to keep going, because like this, it tends to be that younger painters tend to stop too early, and it's a little bit like not enough. I try to fall somewhere in between. I think that that evolves over time. When you look at really great painters who've been painting who no longer alive, but painted for 75, 80 years of their life, their last decade, there's a sense of like kind of freedom in like locating the finish that they don't have when they're younger. If you kind of, you're like, oh, well, maybe their work when it was really overworked, and then this is like super fresh. And I don't know, I think it just changes over time. And it's about the kind of investigation that you're working with. Yeah.
Hi, I would love to hear more about how you think about color. I was thinking about that mango painting, or the painting that started as a mango painting, and I guess wondering, as you're continuing to develop a work like that, do you continue to have like a sort of conceptualization of a palette that maybe evolves with it? You know, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
It started out as a mango painting with something to offset the mango, and then does it become something as sort of fully formed and realized as that in terms of
Yeah, I mean,
palette? Yeah.
like in that particular painting, it's like you have to have the mindset of like willing to like let go. I do actually think that making a painting is this really stressful thing often, where you may have an idea of always, whatever intention you start with, the thing that you end up with is like leagues away from that, always. I just think that's how painting works. And I actually think that's a really amazing part of painting. I don't think that the goal of being a painter is to one day eliminate that distance. I actually think it's to like walk through that distance. So then at a certain point, your psychological mindset is like okay with that process and like willing to kind of let that go. And I think when I like let go of that color idea, then kind of move forward in that painting. This painting was just so big that I had so many ideas about what colors I wanted in it, and they just all didn't work together. The challenge for me in this painting was actually the lime green. Like, it just didn't seem, it was like part of another idea, and I really wanted it in this painting, and when I put it in, it just like didn't work. And so in order to make it work, other things had to happen. There was actually a lot of umber in this painting underneath. Like, you can see these browns. There are different versions of umber and brown. Like, I've been working a lot with umber to set off, but like a kind of a greener version of raw umber. So like start with raw umber and then I'll add like greens to it. And sometimes those greens like the particulates of the pigment will like separate, so you can actually see it on the canvas where it's not going to be one brown, but it's like two browns. So this painting had a ton of that in it, and the idea was to kind of offset it with this. The umber was going to play off of these beautiful light violets. The violets are really hard to paint with oil. It gets really dull and really flat because there's so much white. Is this too much information? I feel like this is what I've been talking about all day with my class. We've been talking about color all day. So then I'm like, okay, well, the umber has to go, but it has to be there in order to work with the green. I do think this is a painting where because it's so large and so long, one of its strengths that ends up working for it is just the length of it, so that the color can move across. It doesn't have, like, the yellow that's on the left side is not the same as the right, and that works because that yellow relates to the blue, and then on the left, the yellow changes and the blue changes, so it's kind of like a different palette. So it's different than making a smaller painting, but really hard to navigate when you're working with. I don't know if I really answered your question. I think color is really hard to talk about. I think we just been talking about it for the last 2 days, and I did a lecture on it in our workshop, and I think some artists find it to be like having like a semiotic value for them, you know. Red feels warm and fiery and I'm just using the most reductive language to talk about it, but that is how some people think of it, and certainly how people can talk about it. I don't have that relationship to color. It's not like sensational for me in that way. It's more like it's like phenomenological for your eyes, like an experience of pleasure. I think of it, I guess it's kind of like trying to talk about music. I'd love to have a conversation with like a music theorist or critic. I mean, I guess like, yeah, Guston's one of his best friends is like a experimental composer. It makes sense to me somehow. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take one more.
Oh, where was I born? Pasadena. Just kidding.
No, I'm actually curious about your figures and your reference material, or how you derive your figures for your pieces.
So early on, like in the earlier work that I showed you, like I said, I was pulling the figures from other paintings, like art history, and then kind of and then I would like make adjustments and incorporate other things into them, and also work from like 6 years ago. I would work out a composition at a really small scale, and I would kind of like decide on the composition somewhere in the middle of making the painting at this scale, and then kind of impose it on the painting to kind of build the space. I actually scrapped that kind of process at a certain point, and now I draw at scale. I don't really know how I came upon that idea. Maybe someone suggested it to me in a studio visit, or I was like reading about Matisse's idea about drawing at scale. But now I like will pin like newsprint on the wall and on the canvas directly and kind of draw at scale. Because I was finding that my biggest challenge with figuration was scale, which we talked about today. And so I had to kind of think about it. Once the painting was in process, the color was laid down and something was happening, I would react and respond to that with figures drawn at scale. And I think actually that allowed me to be quite a bit looser in terms of like abandoning source material. Like I don't use source material. The figuration I want to say it's cartoonish, but it definitely like is informed by like my years of like studying figure drawing when I was a student, and it's kind of I hate to use the word, but maybe it's a little bit generic in that sense. Like it's just not specific, but it works for like how the abstraction is working in the piece. It like allows me to kind of interlock the two, I guess. And kind of figuring out so for example, in this painting, it's long and narrow. There has to be cropped bodies in it. There's going to be bodies that don't have heads and are going to cropped at a certain point. There's going to be bodies that have legs. Otherwise, it's like a bunch of torsos walking through the canvas, which was my initial idea, and just scrap that one. But So then there's some seated figures, some laying down figures, and then I was thinking about, there is a scale shift between the bodies in this canvas, which gives it a little bit of a sense of space. And the only way to develop that for me was at scale. So there's no reference, I don't use models or anything like that. They're not specific enough to need that.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night.